February 4th. 634. The Gaza border. It was not a war yet, it was a slaughter. 300 Byzantine soldiers lay dead in the dust of Dathien, their armor stripped, their weapons gone. The local governor, Sergius, had ridden out with a confidence born of 300 years of Roman dominance, expecting to disperse a band of Bedouin raiders. Instead, he found a military machine. He was the first high-ranking official to die, his head severed before he could comprehend that the world had changed. This was not a raid. It was an extinction event for the old order. In Constantinople, the reports arrived as fragmented whispers. Emperor Heraclius, the savior of Christendom who had just crushed the Persian Empire, was tired. He read the dispatches with irritation. Arabs? He asked his generals. The desert traders. He did not understand that the force moving north was driven by a new, terrifying unification. Under the Caliph Abu Bakr, the tribes of Arabia were no longer fighting each other. They were looking outward, and they were hungry. While the Byzantine garrisons in Palestine panicked, the true threat was materializing in the east. On the Persian front, Khalid ibn al-Walid, the Sword of God, received orders to move his army from Iraq to Syria. Between him and the Byzantine flank lay the Syrian desert, a vast, waterless ocean of death that no army in history had ever crossed. His guides refused. "There is no water for 5 days," one said, trembling. "Even the lizards die there." Khalid looked at his 9,000 men. They were battle-hardened, but they were not immortal. "Cut the lips of the old camels," Khalid ordered. "Let them drink until they burst. We will slaughter them on the march and drink the water from their stomachs." It was a gamble of insane proportions. For 6 days they marched into the furnace. The sun beat down like a physical hammer. Men tied stones to their stomachs to lessen the pangs of hunger. By the 4th day, the horses began to stagger. By the 5th, hallucinations set in. But on the 6th morning, just as the last drops of water were gone, they saw the green oasis of Suwa. They had appeared like ghosts behind the enemy lines. The strategic balance of the entire Middle East shifted in a single week. Khalid's arrival electrified the Muslim forces. He took command of the disjointed armies and forged them into a single blade. His first target was Basra. The city fell quickly, betrayed by its own governor who saw the writing on the wall. But the real test lay ahead. Heraclius, finally realizing the scale of the threat, ordered his brother Theodore to assemble the imperial army. They gathered at Ajnadain, 20 miles west of Jerusalem. 90,000 Romans, sources vary, but they vastly outnumbered the invaders, stood in polished steel formations. Against them were 30,000 Muslims. July 30th, 634. The heat was suffocating. The Byzantine heavy cavalry, the cataphracts, were confident. They were tanks of the ancient world, clad in mail from head to toe. The Muslim army was light, mobile, and unarmored. The battle opened with individual duels, a tradition of the era. Muslim champions rode out, taunting the Romans. Bodies began to pile up between the lines. Then, the surge. The Byzantine archers unleashed a storm of arrows that darkened the sky. The Muslim infantry took the volley, shields raised, chanting Allahu Akbar over the roar of the wind. They did not break. Khalid waited. He watched the Roman lines flex and push. He saw the heavy cavalry commit to the center. Then he unleashed his reserves. The Muslim cavalry struck the flanks with the speed of a whip. The heavy Roman horses, exhausted by the heat and the weight of their riders, could not turn fast enough. Panic spread like a virus. The Roman formation collapsed inward. Theodore barely escaped with his life. The fields of Ajnadain were left carpeted with the pride of the empire. With the field army crushed, the road to the ultimate prize was open: Damascus. Damascus was not just a city. It was a fortress of civilization. Its walls were 20 feet thick, its granaries stocked for a siege of years. The commander, Thomas, son-in-law of the emperor, was a man of iron will. He prepared the defenses, mounting ballistas on the towers and flooding the moat. In March 635, the Muslims arrived. They did not have siege engines. They did not have trebuchets. They had only patience and blockade. Khalid stationed his generals at the 7 gates of the city, sealing it hermetically. The siege dragged on for 6 months. Inside, the people began to eat boiled leather and rats. Outside, the Muslims waited, praying and sharpening their swords. Thomas tried to break the stranglehold. He organized a massive sortie from the Thomas Gate. 5,000 men charged out, covered by a curtain of arrow fire from the walls. One arrow struck a Muslim commander in the eye. The Muslims were pushed back, teetering on the brink of a rout. But Khalid, riding his famous chestnut mare, led a countercharge that stopped the Romans dead in their tracks. The Romans retreated back behind the walls, the heavy iron gates slamming shut on their hopes. September 635, the city was breaking. A Greek priest, Iona, whose house was built against the city wall, contacted Khalid. He had a newborn son and feared for his life. In exchange for safety, he offered a path. On a moonless night, while the city garrison was drunk celebrating a festival, Iona threw a rope ladder down from the eastern wall. Khalid looked at the flimsy ropes, then at his men. "If I fall," he whispered, "do not stop." Khalid climbed. He reached the top, silenced the guards with brutal efficiency, and signaled his elite unit. 100 men swarmed up the wall. They descended into the city like shadows, killing the gatekeepers and throwing open the massive east gate. The Muslim army poured in with a roar that shook the stones. At the exact same moment, on the west side of the city, the Roman commander Thomas had surrendered to the Muslim general Abu Ubaidah. They were signing a peace treaty, promising safety for the citizens. The two Muslim armies met in the center of the city, one fighting, one walking peacefully. Khalid was covered in blood. Abu Ubaidah was holding a parchment. "I have taken this city by the sword," Khalid shouted. "I have taken it by treaty," Abu Ubaidah countered. The tension was razor thin. If they fought each other, the conquest would fail. Khalid, showing a rare moment of political restraint, sheathed his sword. He agreed to honor the treaty. Damascus had fallen, not with a massacre, but with a handshake amidst the corpses. The fall of Damascus sent a shockwave through the Mediterranean. Heraclius received the news in Antioch. He did not scream. He did not weep. He went silent. The loss was catastrophic, but he was the emperor of Rome. He still had cards to play. He looked at his map. He realized that sending small armies was a mistake. He needed to crush this rebellion with overwhelming force. He began to draft the ultimate order. He called for troops from Armenia, from the Slavic frontiers, from the Christian Arab tribes. He emptied the treasury. "I will raise an army," Heraclius whispered to his advisors, "that will leave no Arab alive in Syria. I will turn the desert red." In the south, Khalid stood on the walls of his new prize, looking north. He felt the vibration in the air. The easy victories were over. The empire was waking up. The scouts reported dust clouds larger than any seen before. 100,000 men, perhaps 150,000, marching south. The Battle of Yarmouk was coming, and it would decide the fate of the world for the next millennium. May 636. The earth in northern Syria trembled. This was not an earthquake. It was the march of vengeance. Emperor Heraclius had emptied the garrisons of the Balkans, Armenia, and the Christian Arab tribes to assemble a force of extermination. 150,000 men moved south in a river of steel that stretched for miles. Their orders were absolute: drive the invaders back into the sand and seal the desert forever. In Damascus, the Muslim commanders looked at the reports and their faces went pale. They had 25,000 men. Staying in the cities meant death by siege. Khalid ibn al-Walid made a decision that looked like madness. "We leave," he said. "We give back the cities. We fight them in the open." They abandoned Damascus. They abandoned Homs. They even returned the tax money to the citizens, saying, "We can no longer protect you." The army retreated south to the Yarmouk River, a rugged plain bordered by deep ravines. It looked like a retreat. In reality, it was a kill box. The Roman army, led by the Armenian general Vahan, followed them slowly. They set up a massive camp, confident in their 5-to-1 numerical advantage. For 3 months, the armies stared at each other across the plain. Vahan tried to bribe them to leave. Khalid rode out to meet him, looking at the silk tents and gold crosses. "You are hungry," Vahan sneered. "Take some grain and go." "We are not here for grain," Khalid replied, his hand resting on his sword. "We are here for your blood." On August 15th, 636, the waiting ended. The horns blew. The Battle of Yarmouk began. The battle was a meat grinder. The front line stretched 12 miles. Day 1. The champions fought. Muslim duelists took down Roman officers. boosting morale, but the massive Roman wall of shields did not budge. Day 2. Vahan stopped playing. He launched a massive assault on the Muslim flanks. The pressure was immense. The Muslim left wing broke, and soldiers began to run back toward their camp. But at the tents, they faced a new enemy, their wives. The women of the camp, led by Hind bint Utbah, grabbed tent poles and stones. They charged at their retreating husbands, screaming, "Die protecting us, or do not return!" Shamed and furious, the men turned around and threw themselves back into the spears. The line held. Day 4. The day of lost eyes. The Roman archers darkened the sun with a barrage of arrows. 700 Muslim soldiers lost an eye in a single hour. The line buckled, pushed back to the very edge of the ravine. They were inches from annihilation. Khalid, holding his elite cavalry in reserve, saw the moment. He charged into the gap, a desperate plug in a breaking dam. The fighting continued until sunset, men collapsing from exhaustion among the corpses. Day 6, August 20th. The heat was suffocating. A dust storm began to blow from the south, hitting the Romans directly in the face. They were blinded, choking on grit. Khalid saw the opportunity. He didn't just push back, he executed a masterstroke. He rode his cavalry in a wide arc, smashing into the Roman rear. Simultaneously, a small unit captured the only bridge across the ravine behind the Roman lines. The trap snapped shut. 100,000 Romans were surrounded on 3 sides, with a cliff on the 4th. Panic set in. The Muslims compressed the line. Thousands of Romans were pushed over the edge, falling to their deaths on the rocks below. The river ran red for miles. The imperial army was not just defeated, it was erased. When the news reached Antioch, Emperor Heraclius was an old, broken man. He walked to the cathedral, knowing his life's work was undone. He boarded a ship for Constantinople. As the coast faded, he whispered the words that would echo through history. Farewell, a long farewell to Syria. What an excellent province you are for the enemy. The Roman Empire had lost the Middle East. With the armies gone, the cities fell. Only Jerusalem stood defiant. Patriarch Sophronius barred the gates. The siege lasted 4 months. Finally, with no hope of rescue, Sophronius went to the wall. "I will surrender!" he shouted, but only to your caliph, not to a general. He expected a king in gold. He got Umar ibn al-Khattab. Umar traveled 900 miles from Medina with 1 servant and 1 camel. They took turns riding. When they arrived at Jerusalem, it was the servants' turn to ride. The Muslim generals were horrified to see their emperor walking in the dust, wearing a patched robe. They offered him a white horse and fine clothes. "Step back," Umar said, throwing dirt at them. "God gave us honor through Islam, not through clothes." He walked to the gates. Sophronius opened them and wept, terrified that the end of days had come. But there was no massacre. Umar refused to pray inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to prevent his followers from turning it into a mosque. He prayed on the dirt outside. He signed a treaty guaranteeing the safety of Christians. Jerusalem had fallen without fire. The conquest seemed unstoppable. But in 639, an enemy appeared that no sword could parry. The plague of Amwas. It tore through the army camps. 25,000 soldiers died. The command structure was decimated. Abu Ubaidah, the conqueror of Damascus, died. Yazid died. The expansion ground to a total halt. The survivors were weak, mourning, and exhausted. In Constantinople, the Romans saw a glimmer of hope. The storm had passed. The invaders were dying out. But in the south, one general was still hungry, Amr ibn al-As. He looked west, toward Egypt. The land of the pharaohs was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. It was rich, and its defenses were weak. Amr wrote to Caliph Umar asking for permission to invade. Umar, traumatized by the plague, was hesitant. He sent a letter back. "If you receive this letter before you cross the border, turn back. If you have crossed, proceed with God's help." Amr received the messenger while he was still in Palestine. He suspected what the letter said. He didn't open it. He ordered his men to march. They crossed the border into Egypt. Only then did he break the seal, read it aloud to his men, and smile. "We have crossed," he announced. "We proceed." The target was Babylon, modern Cairo. The prize was Alexandria. A mere 4,000 men were marching to conquer a country of millions. The impossible war continued. Egypt, 640. The fortress of Babylon, modern Cairo, was a monster of stone guarding the Nile. Inside, the Roman legions felt safe. Outside, Amr ibn al-As and his 12,000 men were stuck. The siege had lasted 7 months. The Roman governor, Cyrus, laughed at them, waiting for the desert heat to kill the invaders. But he didn't account for Zubair ibn al-Awwam. Zubair was a warrior of mythical status. He didn't see a wall, he saw a staircase. On a moonless night, Zubair and a small team began to climb the sheer vertical face of the fortress, digging their fingers into the cracks. They reached the top in silence. Suddenly, the air shattered. Allahu Akbar! The shout from the ramparts echoed like thunder. The Romans, convinced the entire Muslim army was inside, panicked. They abandoned their posts and ran. Zubair descended, threw open the heavy gates, and the army flooded in. The lock to Egypt was broken. The road to Alexandria was open. This was the second city of the empire, the intellectual capital of the world. It was defended by the sea and massive fortifications. But in Constantinople, the will to fight finally snapped. Emperor Heraclius, the titan who had held the East together, lay dying. In February 641, he took his final breath. The news paralyzed the defenders. Without their emperor, the Romans lost their nerve. Cyrus surrendered the city. On November 8, 641, the Muslims entered Alexandria. Amr wrote to the caliph, "I have captured a city of 4,000 palaces and 4,000 baths." The breadbasket of Rome was gone. The grain shipments that fed Constantinople stopped. The empire began to starve. While Rome crumbled in the west, a different nightmare unfolded in the east. The Sassanid Persian Empire, the superpower that had rivaled Rome for 400 years, was fighting for its life. Caliph Umar sent an army under Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas to Iraq. They met the full might of Persia at al-Qadisiyah. 100,000 Persians, led by the general Rustam, stood against 30,000 Muslims. The Persians unleashed their ultimate weapon, war elephants. The Arab horses, terrified by the smell and size of the beasts, bucked and fled. The Persian infantry followed the behemoths, crushing the Muslim lines. It was a massacre. "Cut the trunks," Sa'd ordered from his command post. The Muslim archers focused their fire on the eyes and trunks of the elephants. Maddened by pain, the beasts turned and trampled their own troops. On the fourth day, a dust storm rose, the wind of God. Again, it blew the Persian tents away. The Muslim commander Quaqqa led a suicide charge straight at the Persian center. Rustam was killed in the chaos. The Sassanid army disintegrated. The gateway to Persia was kicked open. The road to Ctesiphon, the Persian capital, lay undefended. Emperor Yazdegerd III fled into the mountains, leaving the richest city on earth behind. When the ragged Arab soldiers entered the White Palace, they were stunned. They found carpets so large they depicted entire gardens with emeralds for grass. They found vaults of gold vases and camphor. Some soldiers, having never seen camphor, mistook it for salt and put it in their cooking pots, ruining their victory feast. They cut the great carpet into small pieces so every soldier could have a share. The accumulated wealth of 4 centuries was liquidated in a week. Persia was headless. Yazdegerd III refused to surrender. From the mountains he raised one last army. 150,000 men gathered at Nihavand in 642. This was the last stand. The Muslims marched to meet them but found the Persians entrenched in a mountain fortress. They couldn't break in. The Muslim commander Numan used an old desert trick. He feigned a retreat, spreading rumors that the caliph had died. The Persians took the bait. They poured out of their fortress to chase the fleeing rats. As soon as they hit the open ground, the Muslims turned. The collision was violent. Nu'man was knocked from his horse and trampled to death, but his men didn't stop. They shattered the Persian army. This battle was named Fath al-Futuh, the victory of victories. Persia was no longer an empire. It was a province. The conquests brought unimaginable wealth to Medina, but also danger. In November 644, Caliph Umar was leading the dawn prayer. A Persian slave named Piruz, hiding behind a pillar, lunged at him. Piruz stabbed the caliph 6 times in the belly with a double-bladed dagger. The mosque erupted. Piruz killed 12 more people trying to escape before killing himself. Umar, the man who conquered 2 empires, died on the floor of a mud brick mosque. On his deathbed, a council chose Uthman ibn Affan as the next caliph. He was a wealthy merchant, kind and soft-spoken. He inherited an empire that stretched from Libya to Afghanistan, but peace would not last. Uthman faced a problem Umar never had: the sea. The Byzantines, though beaten on land, still ruled the Mediterranean. Their navy raided the Syrian coast at will. Muawiyah, the governor of Syria, begged Uthman, "Let me build a fleet. We are like birds in a cage while they strike us from the water." Uthman agreed, "But do not force any man. They must volunteer." The Arabs, people of the desert, learned to sail. In 655, off the coast of Lycia, the new Muslim navy met the full might of the Byzantine fleet, led by Emperor Constans II himself. It was called the Battle of the Masts. The fleets clashed. The Arabs, unable to maneuver like the Greeks, lashed their ships to the Byzantine vessels. They turned the sea battle into a land battle on floating wood. It was brutal, close-quarters butchery. Emperor Constans II barely escaped, trading clothes with a sailor to hide his identity. The Mediterranean was no longer a Roman lake. The empire was now a superpower on land and sea. But as the borders expanded, the core began to rot. Soldiers were restless. Accusations of nepotism against Uthman grew. In the shadows of Medina, the swords were being sharpened again. The external war was pausing. The civil war was beginning. June 17, 656. Medina was no longer the sanctuary of peace. It was a cage. Rebels from Egypt and Iraq had surrounded the house of Caliph Uthman for 40 days, demanding his resignation. Uthman, 82 years old, refused to order his guards to fight. "I will not be the first to shed the blood of Muslims in the city of the Prophet," he said. He sat reading the Quran. The rebels lost patience. They climbed the walls of his neighbor's house and jumped into his courtyard. They burst into the room. Uthman did not look up from the holy book. The swords fell. The caliph's blood splashed onto the pages of the Quran, staining the verse, "God will suffice you against them." His wife Naila tried to deflect a blade with her hand and lost her fingers. Uthman was dead. The unity of the Muslim world died with him. The era of rapid conquest stopped dead in its tracks. The sword had turned inward. The empire split. Ali ibn Abi Talib, the cousin of the Prophet and a legendary warrior, was proclaimed caliph in Medina. But in Syria, the governor Muawiyah, a master politician and relative of the murdered Uthman, demanded vengeance. He hung Uthman's bloodied shirt and Naila's severed fingers on the pulpit of the Damascus mosque. The soldiers wept in rage. The two armies met at Siffin in 657. It was the most tragic battle in Islamic history. Brothers fought brothers. 70,000 men died. The battle ended not with a victory, but with a stalemate and arbitration. The chaos lasted for 5 years. In 661, a fanatic assassin struck Ali with a poison-coated sword while he prayed in Kufa. With Ali gone, Muawiyah moved quickly. He did not want a theocracy. He wanted an empire. He moved the capital from the mud-brick simplicity of Medina to the stone splendor of Damascus. The Umayyad dynasty was born. The internal war was over. The external war was about to restart with terrifying efficiency. Muawiyah had a singular obsession: Constantinople. He knew that as long as the city of Caesars stood, Islam would never be safe. In 674, he launched the most ambitious campaign yet. A massive fleet sailed through the Dardanelles, while an army marched across Anatolia. They besieged the greatest city on earth for 4 years. They attacked every summer and retreated every winter. It seemed inevitable that the walls would fall. But the Byzantines had a secret. A refugee architect named Callinicus had invented a substance unknown to science: Greek fire. It was a liquid that burned on water. It could not be extinguished. In 678, the Byzantine ships sailed out to meet the Arab fleet. They pumped the liquid through bronze siphons, primitive flamethrowers. The sea turned into a furnace. The Arab ships, made of wood and tar, caught fire instantly. Sailors jumped into the water, only to find the water itself was burning. The fleet was incinerated. The survivors retreated. It was the first major defeat for the caliphate. Constantinople had survived. Blocked in the north, the energy of the empire exploded west. The task fell to Uqba ibn Nafi. He was the nephew of Amr ibn al-As, the conqueror of Egypt, and he was born for war. He looked at the map of North Africa, the Maghreb, and saw destiny. In 670, he marched 10,000 horsemen into the Tunisian desert. He needed a base, but the coast was controlled by the Byzantine navy and the mountains by the fierce Berber tribes. He chose a flat plain in the middle of nowhere. "Here," Uqba pointed to the sand, "we build." Legend says the ground was infested with wolves and snakes. Uqba prayed, and the beasts vanished. He planted his spear. This became Kairouan, the first Islamic city in the west, a fortress and a launching pad. In 681, Uqba began his grand march. He swept across Algeria and Morocco. The resistance was brutal. The Berbers were not like the Persians or Romans. They fought guerrilla wars, striking from the Atlas Mountains and vanishing. But Uqba was relentless. He pushed 2,000 miles west. Finally, he reached the edge of the world, the Atlantic Ocean. He rode his horse into the surf until the water reached the animal's chest. He raised his sword to the sky and shouted, "O Lord, if this sea did not stop me, I would ride on forever, conquering lands for your sake and fighting those who deny you." There was no more land to conquer. He turned back, but the desert has eyes. The Berber queen, Dihya, later known as the Kahina, and the chieftain Kusaila were watching. They saw that Uqba, in his arrogance, had sent most of his army back to Kairouan, keeping only 300 elite guards with him as he returned through the Algerian mountains. They set a trap at Veshera, modern Biskra. Uqba rode into the valley and saw the hills come alive. Thousands of Berber warriors rose from the rocks. There was no escape. Uqba looked at his 300 men. "Break your scabbards," he ordered. It was the ultimate signal of no retreat. If the sword cannot be sheathed, it must fight until it breaks. They charged uphill. It was suicide, but it was glorious. Uqba fell fighting, surrounded by piles of enemy dead. His death sent a shockwave through the empire. The Berbers counterattacked, sweeping the Muslims out of Tunisia. Kairouan was lost. The Arab armies were pushed all the way back to Egypt. For a moment, it seemed the Western conquest was over. The Byzantines celebrated. The Berbers reclaimed their land. But in Damascus, a new caliph, Abd al-Malik, was reading the reports. He did not see defeat. He saw a debt of blood. He began to mint new coins and raise a new army. "We do not stop," he whispered. "We simply reload." The stage was set for the greatest comeback in the history of the war. 685 AD. The Muslim advance had collapsed. The Berbers had pushed the Arab armies all the way back to Egypt. To the Byzantines, it looked like the nightmare was over. But in Damascus, Caliph Abd al-Malik was done fighting civil wars. He turned his eyes west again. He sent a new general, Hassan ibn al-Nu'man, with a simple order: do not just conquer the land, conquer the sea. Hassan marched. In 698, he did the unthinkable. He bypassed the Berber strongholds and struck directly at the heart of Roman power. Carthage, the great city, which had rivaled Rome for 1,000 years, fell. Hassan didn't just take it, he dismantled it. He feared the Byzantine navy would return to use it as a base. So he raised the walls and built a new base at Tunis. The Roman Empire was kicked out of Africa forever, but the war wasn't over. The Berber queen, Dihya, known as the Kahina, the sorceress, rallied her people. She defeated Hassan in a crushing ambush. Realizing the Arabs were after the wealth of the land, she made a terrifying decision. "They want cities and gold?" she said. "I will give them ash." She ordered a scorched earth policy. She burned orchards, destroyed villages, and cut down forests from Tripoli to Tangier. The Maghreb turned gray with smoke. It was a tactical error. The people, who relied on the land to survive, turned against her. They sent messages to Hassan: "Come back, save us from the queen." In 703, Hassan returned. The final battle was fought at the foot of the Atlas Mountains. The Kahina died sword in hand, a warrior to the end. The resistance broke. North Africa was now Islamic. With the land conquered, a new governor arrived, Musa ibn Nusayr. He was a diplomat as much as a general. He realized that fighting the Berbers was a waste of blood. He offered them equality. He recruited them into the army. The Berbers, fierce and warlike, converted in droves. They became the spearhead of the new army. By 709, the Muslims controlled the entire coast of North Africa, except for one fortress, Ceuta. Ceuta sat on the tip of the continent, looking across the narrow strait to Europe. It was held by Count Julian, a Byzantine noble who had managed to stay independent. Musa tried to siege him, but Ceuta's walls were too high and supplied by sea. Then, history turned on a scandal. Julian sent his daughter, Florinda, to the court of the Visigothic king Roderick in Toledo to be educated. Roderick, a usurper who had seized the throne by force, saw the girl and took her. He violated her. When Julian found out, his loyalty to the Christian king evaporated. He didn't want defense. He wanted revenge. He sent a message to Musa: "I will not only give you Ceuta, I will give you the ships to cross the strait. I will give you Spain." Musa was cautious. Crossing the sea was forbidden by earlier caliphs. But the prize was too big to ignore. He sent his best general, a Berber freedman named Tariq ibn Ziyad. Tariq was a force of nature, one eye damaged in battle, a red beard, and the loyalty of 7,000 Berber warriors. In April 711, Julian provided the merchant ships. Under the cover of night, they ferried the army across the 9-mile strait. They landed at the base of a massive limestone rock. The ancients called it the Pillars of Hercules. History would rename it after the general. Jabal Tariq, Mount of Tariq, or as we know it today, Gibraltar. The landing was not detected until it was too late. Tariq stood on the beach of Europe. He looked at his men. They were nervous. They were outnumbered. In a strange land, facing the Visigothic kingdom, which had a reputation for brutality, Tariq gave an order that defied sanity. Burn the ships. The men watched in horror as their only way home went up in flames. The smoke rose against the blue sky. Tariq drew his sword and turned to his army. "O people, where is the flight? Behind you is the sea. Before you is the enemy. By God, you have nothing but sincerity and patience." There was no retreat. They had to win, or they would die on that beach. King Roderick was in the north, fighting Basques when the news reached him. Invaders in the south. He thought it was a raid. He marched south with haste, gathering a massive host, 33,000 men. Some sources say 100,000. The Visigothic knights were heavy, clad in chainmail, confident in their numbers. They met at the Guadalete River in July 711. The odds were comical: 7,000 Berbers against the full might of the Visigothic kingdom. Tariq requested reinforcements, and Musa sent 5,000 more, but they were still vastly outnumbered. Roderick arrived on a chariot of ivory, wearing a robe of gold cloth. He expected to crush the barbarians in an hour, but Roderick had enemies. The brothers of the previous king, whom Roderick had deposed, were commanding the wings of his army. They had made a secret deal with Tariq. "We will stand aside. You kill the usurper Roderick, and then you leave." They thought the Muslims were just raiders who would take loot and go. They were wrong. The battle opened with a clash of cavalry. The Berber light horsemen, fast and agile, danced around the heavy Visigoths. For 2 days, the lines held. Then, the betrayal happened. The wings of the Visigothic army simply stopped fighting. They stood still. Roderick, in the center, suddenly found himself exposed. Tariq saw the opening. He led a wedge formation straight for the ivory chariot. The fighting was ferocious. The Visigothic center, realizing they were betrayed, began to panic. Roderick fought bravely, but the tide was unstoppable. The king of the Goths vanished in the melee. His body was never found, only his white horse, wandering the riverbank with a golden saddle, and one of his boots stuck in the mud. The Visigothic army shattered. The king was dead. The road to Toledo, the capital, was wide open. Tariq did not stop to loot. He marched north. The speed of the conquest was blinding. Cities surrendered without a fight, thinking these were just mercenaries who would leave. The Jews of Spain, who had been brutally persecuted by the Visigoths, welcomed the Muslims as liberators and helped guard the captured cities. Tariq reached Toledo. The Visigothic nobles had fled. In the treasury, the Muslims found riches that made the Persian spoils look small: crowns of emeralds, altars of gold, and, according to legend, the Table of Solomon, a massive table made of emerald and gold, looted from Jerusalem by the Romans, then taken by the Goths. Musa ibn Nusayr, hearing of Tariq's success, became jealous. He crossed into Spain with his own army of 18,000 Arabs. He met Tariq at Toledo. He struck Tariq with his whip in front of the troops. "I ordered you to stop and wait for me," Musa shouted. But the anger was short-lived. The two generals looked at the map. Spain was effectively theirs. But to the north, beyond the Pyrenees Mountains, lay a new land, the land of the Franks. The Muslims called it Al-Andalus. A new civilization was being born. But the momentum of war is a dangerous drug. They didn't want to stop at the mountains. They wanted the whole continent. Damascus, 715. The gates of the Umayyad capital swung open for the greatest parade the empire had ever seen. Musa ibn Nusayr and Tariq ibn Ziyad, the conquerors of Spain, rode in. Behind them marched 30,000 prisoners, Visigothic nobles in chains, and wagons groaning under the weight of gold. The centerpiece was the Table of Solomon, shimmering with emeralds. The crowd roared. They were witnessing the pinnacle of Islamic power. The caliphate now stretched from the borders of China to the Atlantic Ocean. It was the largest empire the world had ever seen since Alexander. But inside the palace, the mood was cold. Caliph Walid was dying. His brother and successor, Suleiman, was a man of jealousy and paranoia. He did not see Musa and Tariq as heroes. He saw them as threats. When Walid died, Suleiman struck. He stripped Musa of his titles. He fined him 3,000 gold dinars, bankrupting him. The old general, who had given the caliph a continent, ended his days begging for coins outside a mosque in Medina. Tariq, the man who burned his ships, vanished from history, likely dying in obscurity. The message was clear. The empire was bigger than any general. Suleiman had no interest in the West. His eyes were fixed on the one prize that still eluded Islam, the throat of the world, Constantinople. There was a prophecy, a hadith, that said the city would fall to a man bearing the name of a prophet. Suleiman, Solomon, believed he was that man. In 717, he emptied the treasuries. He assembled the army of the end of days. 120,000 soldiers, 1,800 ships. It was a force designed not just to conquer, but to overwhelm reality itself. The command was given to his brother, Maslama ibn Abd al-Malik, a general of immense capability. They marched across Anatolia like a slow-moving earthquake. In Constantinople, the Byzantines were in chaos. Emperors were being overthrown every few months. The empire was bankrupt. But just as the Arab army approached, a general named Leo the Isaurian seized the throne. Leo was cunning, ruthless, and spoke Arabic fluently. Maslama arrived at the Hellespont in July 717. His fleet blockaded the straits. His army crossed into Europe and built a siege wall from the Sea of Marmara to the Golden Horn. Constantinople was sealed. Leo III played for time. He met with Maslama. He offered to pay a tribute of a gold coin for every citizen if the Arabs left. It was a lie. He was waiting for the season to change. Maslama prepared for a standard siege. He had stockpiles of food. He expected the city to starve by spring, but nature had a different plan. The winter of 717-718 was an anomaly. It was the coldest winter in decades. Snow covered the ground for 100 days. The ground froze so hard, the dead could not be buried. The Arab supply lines, stretched thin across Anatolia, collapsed under the snow. The besiegers became the trapped. Famine struck the camp. The soldiers ate their camels. Then they ate their horses. Then they boiled the leather of their saddles. Disease, dysentery, and plague swept through the freezing tents. The mighty army was rotting from the inside. Maslama refused to retreat, terrified of Caliph Suleiman's wrath. But Suleiman was already dead, dying of indigestion in Dabiq, unaware of the horror unfolding in the snow. Spring 718 brought no relief. It brought the Egyptian sailors. A relief fleet arrived from Alexandria, crewed largely by Coptic Christians. Under the cover of night, the Coptic sailors, sympathetic to the Byzantines, defected. They rowed their small boats to the city walls and shouted, "The Arab fleet is unguarded." Leo III unleashed the Greek fire. The Byzantine galleys rowed out. The siphons roared. The Arab supply ships, anchored and helpless, turned into infernos. The water of the Bosphorus burned again. The blockade was broken. To make matters worse, Leo had sent envoys to the Bulgars, a warlike pagan tribe to the north. Tervel, the Khan of Bulgaria, saw an opportunity. While Maslama's starving soldiers were watching the burning ships, the Bulgars attacked their rear. It was a slaughter. 22,000 Arab soldiers were cut down in the forests. On August 15th, 718, exactly 1 year after they arrived, the order was finally given: retreat. The survivors limped back across Anatolia. The fleet tried to sail home, but the Mediterranean is cruel. A massive storm, dubbed the Breath of God by the Greeks, smashed the remaining ships against the rocks of the Aegean Islands. Of the 120,000 men and 1,800 ships that had set out to end the Roman Empire, only a fraction returned to Syria. The failure at Constantinople in 718 marked the end of an era. The period of rapid, explosive expansion, the blitzkrieg of the 7th century, was over. The boundaries of the New World were set. To the west, the Pyrenees Mountains, where the advance would officially halt later at the Battle of Tours in 732. To the north, the Taurus Mountains and the walls of Constantinople. To the east, the Indus River in India. The map had been redrawn. The ancient superpowers, Persia and Rome, were either gone or mutilated. In their place stood a new colossus. The caliphate stopped expanding and started building. The energy that had fueled the swords of Khalid and Tariq was turned toward science, architecture, and law. The age of conquest ended. The golden age of Islam began. The desert had swallowed the world, but the world had also changed the desert. The storm was over, but the landscape of history was altered forever.